Second Cole.
All right, motion by Karski, seconded by Cole to approve those. Any discussion there? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, those are approved. Oh, we'll move on to item 4, Director's Report with Scott. Scott, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Scott McMahon, Director of Metro Communications. Today, I'll quickly go through the Director's Report. The first item that I have in the Director's Report pertains to staffing at Metro Communications. Just a brief update for this year. Thus far in 2022, Metro Communications has had 16 staff resignations. We have hired 12 staff and have extended 4 conditional offers for our October 3rd class. 6 of the 16 resignations involved new hires who did not complete the training. Fortunately, Metro Communications has continued to experience a healthy number of applicants this year, and we have received closer to about 290 applications at this point. Currently, Metro Communications has 8 operators at various levels in their training. Our fully trained dispatch team currently includes 32 full-time operational staff, 3 temporary staff, and 6 leadership staff. As of October 3rd, we will have 2 operational vacancies. In the future, my intent is to provide you with a chart or a graph that makes that easier to view versus reading through this type of information. But I can tell you, like I said, at this point in time, we do have the 2 vacancies, and that
Can you unpack that? You say 2 operational vacancies. What does that mean?
yeah, so let me just review this quickly here. So we've got the 8 people that are at different levels of their training. Some are fairly new into their training. Some have gone through call taking and also data, and then some are working at the law enforcement, or one person's working at the law enforcement level. So with our staffing as today, as of October 3rd, we would have been 2 down, but we lost 1 additional person. So actually, we're going to be 3 down October. But today, we're currently 7 short. So, like I say, in the future, I want to put this into a chart so that it can be easier viewed. But today, we are actually 7 vacancies. But with the 4 coming on board in October 3rd, that'll leave us with 3 operational vacancies. So when I say operational vacancies, that's people that are assigned to the floor to do dispatch tasks versus administrative staff versus, well, I guess at this point it'd be administrative staff. So, so yes, we do have 7 vacancies at this point.
So the 7 vacancies does not include the 8 that are in training,
Right.
which are not independent operators.
Correct.
So we have 32 from a authorized staffing of 49
Correct.
currently.
Correct.
Right, okay. Okay. Other questions on the staffing piece?
Scott, when the 4 come on October 3rd, they're going to be able to work fully independently on the floor?
So October 3rd is the group of 4 people that we just hired. So they'll have no experience, no training. They're going to be assigned to a classroom and training over the course of 10 weeks. So the first point that they'll begin working independently would be 10 weeks from October 3rd, provided that their training goes well.
Thank you.
Yep.
And at 32 right now from 49 authorized, what is our number of staff we hit where we're at a real concern point where, because that's that's 33% down
Yeah.
what we're authorized for.
At this point, with our administrative team assisting our operational staff, we are to the point where I would say we're beginning to see critical level of staffing in our agency. It's to the point where we do have operators that are working overtime. Last month, when I looked at that overtime report, some operators had done as few as 4 hours, but others had done as many as 40 hours in that monthly period of time. So there was quite a few. There's about a dozen people that worked anywhere between 16 and 24 hours of overtime in a 1 month period of time. So We would like to see that be voluntary and not mandated over time. But we are to a point where we are starting to have to mandate overtime and fill some of the vacancies that we have.
Do you have any sort of rubric or anything that shows when we hit this number, we go to mandatory overtime, when we hit this number, we have to send some calls to other PSAPs, or like what, is there a kind of a redundancy plan?
The leadership team and I will be working on that plan over the course of the next week, because we are at a point now where we need to have a plan in place. And over the next week or so, we'll be looking at having some discussions with the police chief and fire chief and trying to determine what services could we cut back on for their agencies, or what help could they provide possibly to Metro Communications as we move forward in this process of filling our vacancies. So like you said, Mayor, we have 8 people in training. We have 7 unfilled positions at this point in time, so 15 of our 45 operational staff.
And the 8 in training, how many people on average make it to the floor through training?
So last year, we had about a 50% success rate with training. As I noted in this paragraph, we've had 6 people so far this year that have left from training.
Okay.
So again, it's about a a little bit better than 50%. So 6 of the 16 resignations, and then we've hired 12 people. So yeah, about 50%. We've hired 12 people this year. 6 of those have left the agency.
Okay. So, sorry for all the question on staffing, just this is a critical
It is.
point for us, and I just have a lot of questions on it. You know, if we've had 284 applications, are we fishing in the right pools for the fish here? Or is our bar so incredibly high that we just can't get anybody out of those applications? And so that's one question. The follow-up would be, how do we advertise? How do we try and get applicants? What channels do we use? Do we do some targeted marketing to try and get people with maybe public safety background?
Sure. So we do advertise in many pools, areas, if you will, everything from newspapers to even professional organizations, Indeed, HireClick, television ads. You might have seen the state of South Dakota allotted for about $70,000 to advertise on TV for 911 communication operators across the state, because they recognize that all PSAPs in the state are beginning to feel the crunch of having to hire additional operators, or maintain their staffing. So there's been those avenues. Locally here, we went to a continuous hiring process to try and build an eligibility list. We have done more interviews, we've implemented more training classes, we've done a variety of changes to try and stay ahead of falling into a position where feel like we're at a critical state in staffing. So through all those different things, that's some of the things we've been working on to try and stay ahead of staffing.
What percentage of your shifts are mandated, like say in the last month?
I would have to ask that question of our deputy director, who oversees the operational side of scheduling and that sort of thing. I don't know, Amy, if you would have an answer to that.
Good afternoon, Amy Chase, Deputy Director at Metro. So I don't know if I have the exact numbers that you're requesting as far as the number of shifts that are being mandated, but even to answer one of your questions earlier, Mr. Mayor, about do we have a threshold for when we mandate? And so each shift does have what we consider our operational minimums, how many people we need in the room in order to complete all of the required tasks. That's answering the phone, that's 2 consoles dispatching for Sioux Falls PD, 1 console for the sheriff's office, 1 data operations doing warrants checks, license plates, that kind of thing, and then 2 in the fire corner, okay, doing fire and EMS for the city and fire and EMS for the county. So looking at that, as we talked to about our training staff, or the 8 that we have in training, we've changed our approach to training, where it used to be a 26 continuous week, and we're trying now to do 2 phases, if you will, of training. So the first phase would get them trained in call taking and data operations, and then they would work independently on the floor for a period of time. At the same time, we would hire a new class, train them in calls and data, and then replace them and take that first group and continue their training. So we're always kind of replacing and not only training our staff fully, but then also getting some relief on the floor. So using those staff, right now we do have quite a few vacancies, primarily on our morning shift, or our A shift, which is 6 a.m. to 1400 or 2 p.m. We have had, from that shift, we've had 2 of our promotions came from there. We also had a retirement recently that came from there, and 2 of our recent resignations came from there. So that shift predominantly has been hit pretty hard. So some steps that we have taken is we have changed some days off that were assigned and bid by an employee. So we've done that. Then come September 19th, part of those people in training are going to move to the floor and then work independently at calls and data. So at that point, then that shift is much better staffed, where there are only 1 below minimums on some days. So where we would essentially have to require somebody, we'd put it out for voluntary sign up first, and if there was no coverage, then we would mandate. Then come October 3rd, Scott talked about we would be hiring a brand new class come October 3rd. But that's also a really important date for us staffing wise, because not only are we potentially hiring 4 people on October 3rd, but that's a date that one of our employees in training becomes fully law enforcement trained. So now he can work all of our law enforcement consoles and our call taking and our data consoles. And then we would have 4 other recruits that then can also work independently just at calls and data. So we get essentially 4 more additional staff on that date to help with those. So as of October 3rd, we do not have any instances where we would be mandating overtime, unless there were situations where there was a last minute call out for sick leave, or if it was a vacancy that had been created based on the approval of vacation requests when staffing was projected to be there. So that was kind of a roundabout way to answer kind of both of your questions, but hopefully that helps. I can provide specific numbers if you need something further.
Thanks, Amy.
Yep.
Other questions on the staffing piece of the report?
Yeah, Scott, I just have a quick question about, you talked about maybe some other PSAPs that would be supportive of our operation. Have you contacted them to see if their workload is similar to ours and if those are really available answers to the problem?
I have not reached out to other PSAPs, particularly because I know that some of them are also running short-staffed. And even though we all do the same type of work across the state, it's very different from one organization to another. So there would certainly be a lengthy training period if we were to try and bring staff from another PSAP across the state.
That was gonna be my next question, actually, because if we're comparing Sioux Falls to Mitchell or wherever, I think we're looking at different animals, and if you go outside of that region, are there people that are actually gonna be interested in doing something in South Dakota? Because we're kind of a lone ranger in this whole process.
Correct. So to go outside the state of South Dakota, I mean, then you run into certification issues and just different standards of training and so forth. So, if we were to draw upon assistance from another PSAP, I would try and do that within state. But like I said, at this point in time, I know some of the other PSAPs are also struggling for staff, so.
So I guess my question is, are those really options for us?
I don't think it would be an option for us at this point in time. I think our options are, as the first paragraph indicates, we have 32 full-time operational staff, and we've got 6 leadership, so that puts us at 38. We have 3 temporary staff. We might be able to reach out, which we have already, to staff that have left our agency. Usually after 90 days, we reach out to see if they want to come back in a temporary status. We could certainly reach out to some of those people again and try and encourage them to come back to the agency in a temporary setting. That might be a better opportunity.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Scott, walk me through the process. So you have openings, you get 284 applications. You got people starting October 3rd, so they've been hired waiting to start? Is that what I understand?
So it takes quite a while to go through our process, our hiring process. So if somebody's interested in applying for a communications operator position, they would make that application online. From there, our very first step is a telephone interview. So we have two retired staff that have come back to the agency and assist us with making calls to these candidates. And from that, they gauge whether they should continue on in the process. If they continue on in the process, then of course the next step would be a written listening test that we have them do. And then after that, we have a virtual recruitment academy, which gives them the chance to see the organization, see the type of work that we do. And then after that would be a panel interview. And then of course, if at the panel interview, we decide that this is somebody we want to give a conditional offer to, after the conditional offer, there's several steps to include a psychological exam, a drug screen, a background, a very, very thorough background investigation. And so that all takes time, but once we give the conditional offer, we're usually about a month out from actually bringing them on board. And during that 1 month period of bringing them on board, we have to do that background check and some of the psychological and some of those other types of things. And we have to provide them with a 2-week ability to give notice to their current employer. So that month goes by pretty quickly.
So the entire process, how long?
Entire process, if it's somewhat dependent on the applicant, but if they keep themselves moving through the process, I would say 6 weeks.
Okay. And then do you try to schedule that process around your open training times, or is training ongoing, or do you try to do training as classes?
So training classes, we currently are about every 2 months, we're starting a new training class. So with this October 3rd class of 4 people, we don't have the ability to start another training class until December. So anybody that's applying now, it's too late for the October class, so we'd have to bring them in the December class, just because of the, our class size is already full, our training officers already have recruits with them, and there's not enough time to get anybody through the background and everything between now and October 3rd, and provide them with a 2-week notice.
So it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. It's something that we changed already a 1.5 years ago, trying to anticipate this labor crunch. So we went to the year-round advertising, included several more classes throughout the year to try and bring our recruits in. So there's a lot of changes that we made to try and stay ahead of this staffing crunch, but it's caught up to us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott.
Okay.
We'll keep going.
So the second item I have is Metro Communications tracks the hours of overtime as well as the purpose of the overtime. So in 2022, Metro has seen an increase in vacancies that require us to pay overtime for staff. And I'm presenting you with a comparison today of overtime to cover vacancies from 2020 through 2022. The total number of hours for vacancies in 2020 was 4,242 hours. The total number of hours for vacancies in 2021 was 3,663. And then I have to make a correction here. Through June 30th of 2022, the total number of hours is 2,544 hours. So you can see we're only halfway through the year, and comparing 2,544 back to 2020, we're going to surpass the 2020 hours of overtime to try and fill vacancies. And again, this is just for vacancy hours. It's not to cover any other type of overtime for meetings or anything like that. The third item I have is we've made several promotions since our last meeting in April, and I just want to recognize those individuals that have been promoted. and show you that there has been some movement in our agency. So Tim Schleiss has been promoted to Quality Assurance Coordinator. Jason Meyer has been promoted to the Training Coordinator position. And David Rowe, Robin Logan, Sarah Simon, and Wes Snyder have all been promoted to training officers. So again, just wanted to recognize and thank those individuals for their promotions and what they're able to provide to the agency. Since our last Metro Management Council meeting, Metro staff have endured several events that were high-stress incidents for our staff. The May 12th severe weather event resulted in 692 telephone calls in a 1-hour period. The July 5th severe weather event resulted in 559 telephone calls in a 2-hour period. We've had other activities such as an organized public rally and several high-risk law enforcement incidents, search warrant type incidents, arrest type incidents that have contributed to additional workload and responsibility for our operators. Staff have been reminded that there are employee assistance programs to help them through that, because just like the officer at the scene of a call or the firefighter at the scene of a call, our operators don't necessarily see, but they hear and they feel and they engage in that situation, which sometimes can be traumatic. And we just want to make sure that our staff understand that we're there as an agency to support them through those types of events and provide them with employee assistance. Fifth item I had on my report is that we continued to meet all of our call answering standards that are set forth by the National Emergency Number Association, oftentimes referred to as NENA. The NENA standard establishes that 90% of our 911 calls shall be answered within 15 seconds, and 95% of 911 calls shall be answered within 20 seconds. During the month of July, Metro Communications operator answered 96.11% of 911 calls within 15 seconds, and 98.18% of 911 calls within 20 seconds. So even though we're short, I just want to commend our staff for the work that they're doing, because they have not failed in any shape or form in the quality of work that they're doing or the quantity of work that they're doing. So just want to recognize them for that.
And I think they should be, Scott, if you don't mind, Mayor, that is excellent numbers, so,
It is.
yes.
And then the next item I have on my list is Metro Communications continues to have a high degree of accuracy in our emergency medical dispatch standards. Again, this is the software that we use, referred to as ProQA. During the month of July, Metro Communications had a 96% compliant and a 4% non-compliant in processing EMD calls for service. We identified that the areas of chief complaint and final coding were the source of those two areas that sometimes are referred to as critical areas that we need to focus on. So I wanted to spend just a minute to take a look at this report that I receive on a monthly basis. And in a compliance range, you have high compliance, you have compliant, you have partial compliance, and low compliance. And then, like I say, after that, you have non-compliant. But 96% are falling in that first four categories and just 4% in the non-compliant. So in that non-compliant area, we identified chief complaint. That's 1.92% of our calls are falling into that area. And then the other is final coding, which is 1.92%. So I want to just give you an example of a chief complaint error, which any error that, or in this case, it's critical that we're looking at the chief complaint, the 1.92% that fall into that critical realm. And that it might be an example of, let's say a person is on a ladder and they fall off the ladder. Is that, it could be Mr. Benega. Is that an example of where that call is being coded as a fall, or is that call being coded as there's a traumatic injury to the body? It just depends on how that operator goes through that particular call and codes it. Same thing in final coding. Is it, when they look at the different types of responses, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, what type of response are they recording there based on the answers that they're getting back from the questions from the caller? And again, that can create an error as far as the software is concerned, but that doesn't mean that we're providing a lesser service to the caller. and it's just important that we recognize that whether it's the fall from the ladder or the traumatic injury, they both might be considered as a P3 transport or a P2 transport. So they fall into the same category. They'll get the same response. It's just that the software recognizes two different events, whether that's traumatic injury or fall from ladder. So just wanted to put that information out there. If you do have any questions, I do have our quality assurance coordinator, Tim Schleiss, here today, and he could expand a little bit on that if you had any questions. Done? Okay. And then the last thing I have is in August of 2019, the FCC proposed a 988 as the nationwide 3-digit number for individuals that are trying to connect for suicide prevention and mental health crisis counselors with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now, on July 16th, 2020, the FCC adopted the rules to establish 988, directing all 988 calls and texts to National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by July 16th of 2022. I want to report that Metro Communications had begun transferring suicide prevention calls for service to the 211 Helpline Center on November 1st of 2021. Since that time, we've had about 66 calls that have met the requirements to be transferred to the Helpline Center. And those requirements is an individual who's non-suicidal and alert, or it could be a suicidal person, non-threatening and alert. In those types of cases, we'll transfer those calls to the 211 helpline. In other cases, we'd process that call for service and dispatch the appropriate resources.
So all the 988 numbers start with you guys, and they only get the triaged ones that meet the criteria for a behavioral health event?
So,
Is that right?
no, 988 is the replacement of the 10-digit phone number, so those would go to the 211 helpline center. But if it's somebody called 911
Oh, 911.
and they were asking for
Got it.
assistance, then we would determine whether that's something that we'd process or we would transfer that call to the 211 help center.
What were you doing with those before?
I believe we're processing most of those calls through our resources. And that's the great thing about 988 is I think it's a number that people who are looking for those types of services can easily remember, and they can get connected with behavioral people in that line of work. And I think in the past, 911 was an easier number for people to call who were in need of assistance, and I think oftentimes 911 was being used for a purpose that didn't necessarily fit the assistance that they were looking for. But now still, if people call 911, we'll still get them that assistance, but we'll be able to transfer that call to 988 versus processing it as a police call or a fire call or something like that, EMS call. So it just puts the right resources in the right place for that caller. And the last thing I have on my report is the charts that we typically use. And the first one is the number of calls for services. This is calls that we're sending a law enforcement, fire, EMS response to, as well as the number of radio transmissions. So on the left side of the column, with the little phone symbol, that's the number of calls that we're sending out to police, fire, and EMS. And you can see that on the police side, it's fairly flat. On the fire side, just a slight increase, and EMS, same thing, just a slight increase. On the transmit side, which is the radio tower, on the right-hand side of the columns, you can see that police, the number of transmits are down, or push-to-talks, as we refer to them, are down. Fire side, they're up just slightly, and EMS up slightly, but trending downward. And then the second chart that I have today is the number of telephone calls into Metro Communications and out of Metro Communications. And you can see that these are based upon the different councils that we have, whether that's PD East, West, Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office, data, fire, county fire, and then call taker positions. What's happening here is you can see that for the most part, the numbers of telephone calls that are being answered at PD East and West are down. That's by purpose, because we know that those two councils handle a lot of radio traffic, and we have to have them available for radio traffic versus telephone traffic. Same kind of thing for Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office. That's a council that handles a lot of radio traffic. Our intent is to try and, again, have that person available for radio traffic. So we've tried to keep the number of calls down in the past, but you can see that there's a slight increase there. And the reason for that is we have fewer call takers. So now that position has had to start taking more calls. Same with data. We try and have that as somewhat of a backup call taker. And you can see that they're also had a slight increase in the number of calls they're taking. Fire, we try and also keep both of those boards as non-call takers. And on call taker position, you can see even though that's where we want our calls going to, the number has dropped off slightly because we have moved more of those calls maybe to the Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office or fire boards to handle. So that's what I have for a report today. If you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
All right, thanks, Scott. Any other questions from the council that we didn't ask earlier? All right, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
All right, move on then to item 5, FF&E purchase for our future facility.
Yeah, so as we work towards completion of the new public safety training campus, we've already made contact with some of our large vendors, things for like consoles that we'll be using for furniture and items such as a radio system, telephone system. We've been working through those types of purchases. But the city of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County has supported our relocation to that new public safety training center. And, you know, it identifies in an agreement, the public safety answering agreement, the joint public safety answering point agreement identifies the financial commitment for the city and the county. And we've worked closely with our vendors, as I said. We're trying to work with vendors now to purchase electronic components such as computers, computer monitors, switches, and other related components. Most of those items, or I should say these items, are purchased that is exempt from procurement statutes pursuant to SDCL 518A 225. We've been advised from some of the vendors that we've contacted that we should make purchases as soon as possible to avoid any future price increases, as well as availability. Availability is becoming a problem with electronic type devices, and we just want to make sure that if we can make purchases now, that we'll have those things ready for our center and we won't be delayed moving into our new center because of the purchase of electronic equipment. So with that, I'd respectfully request authorization to permit Metro Communications the ability to make a maximum purchase of $215,000 from Metro's reserve funds until such time the city of Sioux Falls or Minnehaha County can provide reimbursement. That $215,000 is based off of quotes that we've already received for these types of equipment purchases. And again, we just want to try and make sure that we can buy those items now so that we have them when we need them.
All right, thanks, Scott. Commissioner.
Oh, when do you need them? Are we talking March? Is that kind of the date we're looking at still, or?
Yeah, so good question. The occupancy date of that building is scheduled for October, but we would be in that facility installing equipment as early as end of March, April of next year is when we're planning for like radio communications equipment, the council furniture equipment. Those types of things would be installed already as early as April 23.
So is this, computer monitor, so is this mostly electronics or is it
It's
furniture and fixtures?
So these items here that I'm talking about are all electronic items, computers, computer monitors, switches for the server room. All those things will start to be installed as early as April next year.
Okay.
So once they install the council furniture, you know, kind of like what you're sitting at today, once they install that council furniture, we'll come in behind and start installing radio equipment, computers, keyboards, monitors, all those types of things that connect to the back server room. So then we need the switches in the server room to connect it all.
And the 215 is in the budgets of the county and the city to be reimbursed to you then for next year? Is that the?
So the original agreement was that the Minnehaha County would provide $2.15 million towards the FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment for our new building. And, you know, some of that, like I said, is radio equipment, some of it is council equipment, some of it is regular furniture, and some of it is electronics, such as what we're talking about here. And the electronics that we've identified that we need are in that $215,000 range of equipment purchase.
I guess my question then, Scott, if I may, why wouldn't the money come from the partners? Why do you have to pull it out of there?
It's a good question. I worked with city and county officials, the commission office, and there's currently a project that the city and county are working on together, and we're waiting for that project to come together, and at that
So you want to
point.
move forward faster than that's happening?
Correct.
Okay, makes sense.
I've talked with, Scott gave me a heads up on this, talked with Sean, and Carol's been in the loop too. Some kind of horse trading, we're figuring out a joint project together that will affect,
I get it.
this. The money's there, we just gotta get through that other project first, so we're moving at the speed of government, and he needs to move faster.
Do you need a motion on this to
I think
approve
we'll need
it?
a motion to, the motion would be to authorize, Metro to make a maximum purchase of $215,000 from their reserve funds, for purchase of said equipment until reimbursement can take place.
That'd be my motion.
I'll second that.
All right, motion by Karski then, and seconded by Benninga. Any discussion on that one? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that is gonna pass. Scott, thanks.
Thank you.
Anna, well, you have to talk about our financials as of July, item 6.
All right, hello, Anna Raker, Business Manager for Metro Communications. You have your financials in your packet. I also have them up here on the screen. We're actually sitting very good financially, I will say. You know, we talked a lot about our staffing vacancies and the additional hours that our staff are working, and that is resulting in some overtime. But all things considered, we're sitting in a good spot. So with that, we'll take a look at our balance sheet to begin with. Our cash as of January 31st is almost 1.2 million, which is about a little over 150,000 more than last year at this time. But that does make sense if you think about it. We made a decision, you made a decision as a council to increase the support from the city and the county, looking long-term and preparing for moving into a facility and having both a backup and a primary facility. And so this was a planned strategy. You'll notice that there's a couple negative numbers there, which might look odd to you, but just a reminder, the due from state and due from county, that just shows that some additional 911 surcharge funds have flowed in from the state of South Dakota and through the county for 2021 surcharges. Sometimes we have back pay that flow through to each of our agencies, and so based on our estimate at year end, we've exceeded those two line items. The due from state is the amount that comes directly to Metro, and those are the funds that are the result of the incentive funds that we get because of the size of the agency we are. And we get about 33% of that pool of funds that flows through to Metro. The due from county are the traditional surcharges, so those are the per subscriber line per month. All right. Let's see. I don't really have anything else alarming here. I will point out, you know, we have some accounts payable at the end of July. We had a payroll on July 29th. And so several of those payments were processed on August 1st. Those are, the bulk of those are, well over half are payroll liabilities that were paid in the 1st of August.
Can you refresh me, or my memory on line 10, the big change in the pension?
Sure.
What that is again?
Yeah, I know we talk about this quite often, but yeah, absolutely. So throughout the balance sheet, you see entries for net pension liabilities or net pension assets. And under the audit standards, we're required to report certain things in our accounting books that aren't cash related. They're information that are related to the health of our organization. The net pension refers to or provides you a picture of the SDRS pool as it pertains to Metro. And so the state of South Dakota, Rod Fortin and his team put together the statistics and the information for every single agency and every single municipality and county to utilize to put this information together on our balance sheets each year. And so it's reflective of our staff, what our contributions are, their ages, their projected retirement, that type of thing. And so depending upon the health of the SDRS pool and where those funds are managed and our share of those either liabilities or assets, those are reported by each entity across the state that's a member of the pool. Is that helpful?
It is, but I still am foggy on why there's the $1 million swing in the
Yeah.
difference from year-to-date last year versus this year.
Yeah, that has to do with the health of the pool at the state level. So they manage the pool of funds. Remember, we have a defined benefit plan. And so the defined benefit is based on an employee's years of service times a multiplier and their highest average compensation. And the state manages the pool of funds that we contribute. For Class A employees, it's 6% withheld and 6% matched. For Class B public safety employees, it's 8%. And they take those funds and they manage those funds and invest them in order to manage them for the long-term benefit payout. And so this is really just a reflection of how they're managing the funds and the inflows versus the outflows and what their projections are.
Makes sense?
Sure.
$1 million, I guess, I suppose with some of our resignations and stuff, that they're pulling pension, I mean, I'm still
I don't think it's,
$1 million.
Oh,
Why
yeah.
it's showing,
I would
I'm
say
too
that,
dumb to figure this out maybe, but, it's just a huge balance sheet swing on the assets that I'm.
so I wouldn't reflect this necessarily directly on our employee hires, retirements, and resignations. I would look at this as SDRS Board of Trustees manages a huge pot of funds. And interest rates go up, interest rates go
This is
down.
market related, this is just market driven.
I think it's, yeah, it's a little bit of everything,
Is
but
that bad?
but this swing here is not a swing that is related to because we had turnover. It's a much bigger picture. And actually, if you look at this, the swing is a greater asset. So we went from 6,000 in assets for our share to 1 million, so it's to our benefit. It's not a net pension liability that it swung $1 million, it's a net pension asset. Do you see what I mean there?
I do, yeah,
Like your IRAs just went from 6,000 to 1 million?
yeah.
Yeah.
Which- Okay, thank you. I still don't get it, but I'm gonna talk to someone else. I wanna talk more about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
help educate me.
We do come back to this quite often, so
Yeah.
I know it's at a
Okay.
much bigger level. All right. So moving on to the comparison in a summary format for the current year versus the prior year. So what you see here is, in the first column, you see our year-to-date revenues and expenditures, and then you see the prior year-to-date, so the same 7 months. And then you see the variance in dollars and percentage. So you can see that our surcharge revenue so far in 2022 is greater than our surcharge revenue in 2021. And the increase is over 4%. I would caution that I don't know that we'll sustain that through the end of the year. Sometimes you see wide swings each month in the surcharge collections. Some of it has to do with how vendors across the nation remit their surcharges. They're supposed to remit monthly, but some of them remit every 2 months. And so you do see some fluctuation from month to month. So just don't assume that we'll maintain that 4%, but we'd sure like to. And if we had a crystal ball, we'd know, and I'd be able to tell you, but we don't. You see the city and county share is an increase of 15%, as we talked about earlier. That was planned. You can see that our services have increased slightly. A good chunk of that is due to the PSAP fee to the Brandon Police Department, which is reflective of our budgetary expenditures. And then you can see the other revenue has increased. Our interest rates have gone up in the last several months. And so that's reflected in increased interest income on our checking account, which is a nice thing.
What's the grant that we lost?
So the grant that we had last year was the 911 funding stream. Do you recall when we talked last year, we got that simulator through those state funds? We also purchased some radios, and then there was some software that was used for analytics, and that was the 28,000. The simulator was 7,000. I think the radios were just under 10,000, like $9,900. And then it was 11 or 12,000 that we spent on that First Watch analytics. And so those were grant funds last year. They were for a very specific project that Scott and the team worked towards getting approval through the State 911 Coordination Board. So, and that's a good segue, Mayor, into the 911 surcharges. Remember that $1.25 comes into the state, and we get about 86 or 87 cents after fees that flows through the county per subscriber. And then we get a chunk of the incentive funds. The balance of that $1.25 is held by the state, and they do lots of good things with it. They help maintain the phone system. They provide local funding. They don't like to use the word grant, but it's like a grant, but they call it local funding. And that's how we were able to buy those things last year, and that's how Scott was able to obtain support for a lot of the things we're doing for PSAP and staffing. Yep. Okay, expenditures. So you can see our expenditures have increased quite a bit, or excuse me, personnel services have increased quite a bit over last year. Part of this is our COLA and step increases for employees, just a normal increase. Interestingly enough, it's 15 pay periods last year through the first 7 months, and this year too. The rest of this is the incentive funds that you authorized to pay employees. That was a good chunk of the increase that we didn't have last year that we had this year. And then the overtime that Scott talked about. So we do have currently an increase in overtime, as you'll see on the next page. Looking at operating expenditures, there's professional services have increased. As Scott mentioned, we're focusing differently on recruitment. We identified who we were going to target and how we were going to target them to try and identify more appropriate candidates. We changed our process with how we were handling applicants to move them through the process smoother. And as an example, I looked up while you were talking about these October 4th or October 3rd hires. Just as an example, one of them went through the process in June and didn't want to start work until October. That was their choice because of personal reasons. The other applicant dates were August 2nd, August 14th, and July 15th. So when Scott said they can move through quickly if they want to, they move through very quickly because they already have their conditional offers and are in the background. So it's an example of how responsive we've become to applicants. If they're willing to move quickly, we will move everything we can just to get them through and make sure that, you know, we have them, we have their best interest and our best interest in mind, so. With the rest of these, pretty close to last year. There's some ebbs and flows between supplies, travel and training, just a difference in some of its timing of when we bought our computers or radios one year versus the other, and just changes in how we're doing continuing ed. And then the last page is a comparison of the current budget to actual, and this is in detail. And this is the one where you've asked me to show you year-to-date compared to the original budget year-to-date, or the current budget, and the variance. And then you also want to see it compared to the annual budget with a percentage. And so this one's got a lot of columns, but it does provide some information that I know you like to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at this, you can see now we've year-to-date, we've exceeded our budget by over 20,000 in surcharges. And that's a great thing. And if you look at that, that's about a 2% more than what we actually budgeted for. And if you recall, we budgeted about a 2% increase. And so at 4% increase from last year, that plays out, the total of that is the 4%. You can see the breakdown for the PSAP fees, our audio recordings, EMS transfer fees, and then the big one here, the grant funds. So this again is the local dollars that we had to hire the additional staff. And that looks pretty rough when you look at it and you see that we're missing that 150,000. And that's directly related to turnover because the staff we're hiring are replacing the turnover versus the staffing up for the grant funds. And Scott's been in conversation with the state and they've been very supportive of us. They're seeing this across the state and they're still holding those funds for us. The other thing I'll point out is that even though that 150,000 is a really big amount, if you look down at the personnel, you'll see that the difference in the vacancies for salaries, offset by where we've gone over budget year-to-date for overtime, is still well above that 150. And so is it ideal? No. We'd rather have the staff here. We would rather not be spending the money on overtime, and we'd rather have a full team, fully trained, and everybody on board. But the 150,000 that you see up there isn't hurting us financially because we don't have the wages. It's a direct reimbursement. So, and then you can see we've also saved a significant amount of money in health insurance. And we talked about that before. We fared very, very well with our health insurance premiums. They barely increased. And so we're going to save some money in that line item too. Questions about personnel? Okay. Operating, again, pretty straightforward. There's some things that are maybe a little different from the budget. It's all about timing. We've purchased a bunch of computers. We got those purchased earlier this year. They were, and so there won't be as many hardware purchases through the end of the year. Software is well over budget, but we had to make a move to Office 365 for some of our staff, and that's a cost that may be coming to all staff, but right now we're working with the county, our IT person, and there are several of us using Office 365. Questions?
Any questions for Anna, Commissioner?
I'm gonna take one more stab at line item 10. I'm assuming that the SDRS is funded to over 100% right now, is that correct? And this has to do with the funding of the SDRS and how much is then attributed back to us. So last year, I mean, if our portion of the funding for our pension liability is $10 million, and we were 6,000 over because that's where the SDRS was, that's what's attributed to us. They've had a better year this year, and now, instead of 10 million, we're probably like 11 million. I'm just throwing numbers out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's tied to
The health of that fund,
yeah.
yes. It's all
So
about the health
So
of
if
that
it was a
fund.
negative, it would mean the SDRS is probably underfunded on their pension plan.
Mm-hmm.
But we're positive, so we're overfunded.
It's just a wonky way to put it on a balance sheet, because it really.
Yeah, and we
makes
won't,
The balance sheet gets so out of whack
it
as
does.
a result.
I totally agree with
It's-
you. And we won't have that expenditure. That expenditure isn't something we will cut a check for. And if you remember, we used to have to report OPEB. Remember those discussions about the post-employee benefit costs? And those were something similar where it's an entry about the health or the exposure that the agency had for post-employee benefits. And so we removed that benefit and we removed those expenditures from our audit. I don't know, do you don't want to add anything to that? All right.
Got it. All right, any other questions for Anna on the financials? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Well, that's.
Okay. We're gonna move on to item 7. We're gonna go into exec session. How does this room work for that?
Mr. Mayor, if we want to use the next room for the executive session, then we can come back in here for open session.
Okay.
I'll move to approve the financials.
Second, Benega.
Motion by Karski, seconded by Benega to approve the financials as presented. Any discussion there? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Need a motion to move us into executive session for the purposes of, and is authorized by SDCL 1-25-2, 1, 3, and 4.
Motion to approve, Cole.
Second, Benega.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right, we'll head over to an exec session and we'll be out in a bit.